Magandang araw po sa inyong lahat. My name is Hans Brandeis and I'm living in Berlin, Germany. I'm an ethnomusicologist by profession and I made 15 research trips to the Philippines since 1976. My main research topic are the boat lutes of the Philippines. Nowadays, these instruments can only be found on the islands of Mindanao and Palawan. Until the middle of the 20th century, they were also used on Mindoro, and during the Spanish colonial times on Panay, Leyte and Samar. On Luzon, they were formerly used by the Pampangueños and probably by the Bicolanos. Aside from the fact that the term KUTIYAPI seems to be used almost all over the Philippines, all the available evidence shows that the term generally did not refer to instruments similar to the boat lutes of Mindanao and Palawan as we know them now. Instead, the term mostly referred to small lutes with a resonator made from half a coconut shell and a short neck. They used to have 4 strings, later 6 strings. So, Mindanao and Palawan are actually the only areas where boat lutes still survived up to now. Basically, all the different indigenous groups on both islands have their own distinct boat lute traditions. Depending on how closely the cultures of these people are related, their boat lute traditions might be quite similar or quite different. During my research, I found out that there are about 23 different types of boat lutes played by 38 IP groups. I will now try to give you a brief overview of the Philippine boat lutes. It will be a bit simplified, leaving out regional variations. Looking at the construction of the instruments, we can state that all existing Philippine boat lutes have 2 strings. One for playing the melody, the other one serving as a drone, which means a permanent sound that always stays on the same pitch. Philippine boat lutes have an elongated resonating body similar to a boat. On the symbolic level, however, they are primarily meant to represent animals, not boats. The body is usually hollowed out from the back, and the opening is covered with a thin wooden board. Basically, we can distinguish 2 main types of Philippine boat lutes. There are instruments with all their frets on their resonating bodies, and there are those with their frets mainly on the neck. First, there are the big lutes that have all their frets placed on the body. These are the instruments that are usually called KUTIYAPI. Here are some samples. On top, a KUTIYAPI of the Higaonon, below it a PIAPI of the Bukidnon, followed by 2 KUTIYAPI of the Maranao and 1 KUTIYAPI of the Maguindanaon. At the lower end of their resonating bodies, the first 2 instruments clearly show the carved heads of a mythological bird or dragon snake and a monitor lizard. The neck of the instruments are supposed to represent the tails of these animals. The KUTIYAPI of the Maranao, on the other hand, are clearly the most attractive and beautifully decorated of all Philippine boat lutes. In former times, the instruments used to show the symbolic meaning of a crocodile, similar to the KUTIYAPI of the neighboring Higaonon. Nowadays, the instruments show triangular carvings at both ends. The design of these carvings imitates the so-called panulong that can be found on the royal houses of the Maranao as royal insignia. Finally, the head on the KUTIYAPI of the Maguindanaon shows a bird that resembles the herons found in the rice fields, but it is also meant to represent a paradise bird. This is the distribution of the KUTIYAPI type of boat lutes on the island of Mindanao. Maranao, Maguindanaon, Bukidnon, Higaonon, Western Bukidnon Manobo, and Arumanon Manobo. There are lutes that are a little bit smaller than the KUTIYAPI, but also have their frets on the body. These are the instruments called Kuglung by several Manobo groups on Mindanao. The design of the Kuglung shows two different symbolic meanings. First of all, the instruments represent a monitor lizard, with the animal head carved at the lower end of the body and the neck of the instrument considered as the tail of the animal. However, the hook-like shape of the head also represents a horse, which is emphasized by the many bundles of horsehair attached as decoration. It is very hard to determine the exact origin of an instrument of the Kuglung type. There are no structural differences in the construction of these instruments that would allow us to determine the exact ethnic group. On the picture, we can see a Kuglung of the Dinananon Manobo on top, followed by two instruments of the Ata Manobo and one Kuglung of the Tigwa Manobo. This is the distribution of the Kuglung type on the island of Mindanao. Ata Manobo, Matiksaluk Manobo and Tigwa Manobo, Dinananon and Kulamanon Manobo, Obo Manobo, and Pagobo Tagabawa. On Palawan, there are huge lutes called Kusyabi or Kuglungan by the Palawan people. These instruments also belong into the first group, despite the fact that they have frets on half of their necks. Regarding their symbolic meanings, these instruments usually refer to the human body. The Kusyabi or Kuglungan can be found in the southern part of Palawan Island. The second main type of Philippine boat lutes comprises all those instruments where the complete length of the neck is covered with frets. Most Philippine boat lutes belong into this category, meaning most of them are not KUTIYAPI. All these lutes are smaller than those of the first main type, and they usually sound higher in pitch. These lutes fall into several subcategories. The best known of them are the Hugulung of the Tuboli. Here are some sample instruments. The Hugulung of the Tuboli are relatively easy to identify because of the design of their heads, which always show variations of the rectangular shape of a brick. Lutes of those IP groups living in close neighborhood to the Tuboli have a design that is very similar to the Hugulung. But while a Hugulung can be easily identified, this is hardly possible for the lutes of neighboring ethnic groups, which show a broad variety of designs. This picture shows 5 Fuglung or Fuglung of the Blaan. The lutes of the Blaan actually show the widest diversity of different designs, different colors, different ornamentation, with or without horsehair, heads of different shapes and sizes, among all the Philippine boat lute traditions. The same is true for the Puglung of the Dulangan or Cotabato Manobo, as well as for the Fuglung of the Ubo and Tasaday Manobo. It's hardly possible to determine the exact origin of a lute of this type. All these lutes have no specific symbolic meaning. Because of the decoration with horsehair, individual lutes might be connected to horse symbolism, Very few lutes also show representations of animals like snakes. Nevertheless, all these small and medium-sized lutes have to be classified as belonging together into one common cluster of closely related instruments. Their area of distribution is as follows: Tboli, Blaan, Dulangan or Cotabato Manobo, Ubo, and Tasaday Manobo. Another type of lutes with frets on the neck can exclusively be found in the eastern part of Mindanao. This picture shows 4 Kuglung of the Mansaka and Mandaya, 1 Kuglung of the Manguangan, and 1 Kudyung of the Agusan Manobo. All these lutes together comprise another cluster of closely related instruments and similar music traditions. One of the main features of these instruments is the design of their heads, which look like kind of sickle-shaped. But actually these heads show the stylized shape of a chicken. This design is of special significance as chicken are the main sacrificial animals of the IPs of the Philippines. These are the areas of distribution of the lutes belonging to the Kuglung and Kudyung complex: Mandaya, Mansaka, Manguangan, and Agusan Manobo. The KUTIYAPI tradition of the Subanon of Zamboanga is more a kind of standalone tradition. It seems though that it has some kind of historical connection with the Kudyung tradition of the Agusan Manobo that I just mentioned, because the lutes of both traditions share 2 features that set them apart from other boat lute traditions of the Philippines. Their instruments are the only ones with frets under both strings and not only under the melody string, and they are both played with the bare thumbs, without the use of a plectrum. There are 4 subgroups of the Subanon, and it's not known whether these subgroups use the same type of KUTIYAPI. This is the distribution area of the KUTIYAPI. Northern Subanon, Central Subanon, Lapuyan Subanon, Western Subanon. The Fugerung or KUTIYAPI of the Tuduray are quite different from the lutes of the neighboring ethnic groups. The most peculiar feature of their design can be seen at the lower ends of their resonating bodies, which are shaped like the fin of a fish. We can find the same design feature of a fin shape with the KUTIYAPI of the Palawan people. This is surprising because the Tuduray and the Palawan live far apart on different islands separated by the Sulu Sea. The picture shows on top 2 Fugerung of the Tuduray, below 3 KUTIYAPI of the Palawan. Some of these KUTIYAPI belong to the smallest boat lutes in the Philippines. We can find these boat lute traditions here: Tuduray and Palawan. So far, a short overview of the main types of Philippine boat lutes and their regional distribution. Unfortunately, we have to state that the Philippine boat lute traditions in generally are a dying art. Some of them are already extinct. For example, we hardly know how the lutes of the Batak of Palawan looked like, because all the makers and players have already passed away, and there is only one single instrument that survived in a museum collection. We have no idea how the instruments of the Tacbanwa of Palawan looked like, as there are no instruments left, no recordings, photographs, or ethnographic information. The lutes of the Alangan Mangyan of Mindoro went extinct sometime in the 1960s or 1970s, and there are only 2 instruments left. We have no idea how these lutes were played. There are lots of KUTIYAPI of the Maranao that are still part of museum collections, so that we have a good idea about the diversity of their designs. But there seem to be no more living players of the instruments anymore. I was able to collect 2 so-called piapi of the Bukidnon in the early 1980s, but I was never able to find a player. These are the only 2 piapi left in existence. Having said this, I just hope that our engagement as students and lovers of boat lutes will also encourage the musicians of the Philippine indigenous peoples to revive their beautiful traditions of Philippine boat lutes. Thank you for your interest. You might want to join our advocacy page on Facebook called Boat Lutes of the Philippines under the link given here. And for more information on the Philippine boat lutes, you might also take a look at my publications, which you can download for free by following this link here.